welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this episode is very important because we will discuss on blockchain economy, and we have one of the interesting things from Professor Adrian because he is a famous writer and a famous scientist. Recently, he published a book, and very interesting book. So before I go to these final discussions on this blockchain economy, I want to request Professor Adrian. Because in social media already it create a huge impact and many people want to know about your book, and then we will go for the discussion about this blockchain economy, and I will request our expert panelists from around the world. Professor Adrian.
Okay. Well, I didn't know. I'm not. I didn't know it was so getting well circulated social media. But anyway, so this book has just been published. So I got the hard copy myself just 2 days ago. It's called Populism and Economic Nationalism. It's about politics, actually. And the subtitle is Australia's First Populist Politician, Senator Fraser Anning. There he is. Actually, this book is interesting because when I proposed it to the publisher, it was going to be a very dry academic analysis about the rise of populism and economic nationalism, not just in USA, but in many other countries around the world, for example, Turkey, etc. And really just a dry academic look at the pros and cons of populism and economic nationalism. But then I began through when I began writing this book, it began to become I began to have a lot of interviews with a senator in Australia, because I'm based in Australia, who is probably the only politician that is a real populist and economic nationalist. And I ended up getting drawn into his life and his history. Why? Because I wanted to understand. How did he form his political views, which in Australia is very radical, because Australia is a very left, let's say left-wing country. We have free medical care for all. It's called Medicare. We have unlimited unemployment insurance. It never runs out. So we have pensions for everybody. So we are kind of like a very socialist country, so to speak. If you maybe in America we'd be labeled as socialist. But I really want to know how did this Senator Fraser Anning form his views, which was very different from the traditional normal politician in Australia. And I realized that there's a very big difference between the working class woman and man in Australia and the political class. And so this book ended up having ended up having a lot of it ended up being a biography about this senator, because I realized that he is probably the only working class politician in Australia, and there's a very strong gap between the working class and the political class, the people who are in the parliament in Australia. And so this book ended up being a very in-depth view about how did the senator form these views from his life, and it really comes down to he was a farmer. His father owned a big cattle farm, and he was a farmer, and somehow, from becoming a working class man, he became a senator. And so I realized that I and many academics live in a very closeted world, that we really don't know much about the real working class woman and man life. And so this book really is ended up becoming a biography about a working class people, and how it's very easy to dismiss their views, but I think I got an insight. How do they form their views? it's very easy for us who are in the, let's say, academia or a political class, to dismiss these views, but I think we have to really consider why do they form these views, and how does it form this new kind of populism that we have. So the book was ended up being more about working class women and men, and how different they think from the, let's say, academic and political elites, and how I hope this book will be read by many academics like myself. It'll be eye opener for them.
Mhm. Thank you, Professor. Actually, I know that Professor Robs and the other speaker, they have their write-up books and many interesting things. So you can share with World Talent Economy Forum, because we are now connected with 290 universities in Asia Pacific, and many actually academicians and the youth communities and the government body, they want this kind of book. Even I know that Professor Rob, he has many write-up, and you people have any write-up, we can do that. And beside that, from World Talent Economy Forum, we can go for scientific publications. Actually, World Talent Economy Forum with Nikola Tesla Graduate Schools, we are launching one of the largest conference next year, December, and this Nikola Tesla technology conference. And already we are working with few countries, more than like 10 different countries prime minister office. They confirm that they will join in the conference. Beside that, the scientists, corporate personalities, politicians, I think everybody, we will welcome. So Professor Adrian will be chair for that, and I request all of our board of advisors and our member of World Talent Economy Forums, please support our initiative. I am sure it will be high quality conference, and it will create a very strong impact from Malaysia. And we are happy that we have that kind of high quality speakers and the mentors in World Talent Economy Forum. So as it is some sort of economic analysis and political analysis, I just want to request Dr. William, if you give some sort of insight. I know you do not get the book, but I'm sure everybody can easily buy from this book from Amazon. But Dr. William, if you give the some feedback, then I directly want to go for the blockchain economical analysis from Professor Rob. Dr. William.
Okay, well, once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever we are in the world, and wherever and whenever you are watching. Professor, it's truly a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I dig all of my colleagues, as I'm fond to say. I can say this, Professor, without having particularly read your book, but rather commenting at a 50,000-foot level, with regard to the rise of nationalism and nationalistic kinds of policies, at least that we've seen over the last, say, decade. It really is, in some respects, I have found, and this is just obviously my viewpoint, sometimes out of fear, uncertainty, and often in uncertain times when the future is up for grabs, people go and move to those areas, at least in political ideology, where they feel it's safest. And oftentimes it's more slanted towards authoritarian governments. And of course, an authoritarian government can be either of the left or of the right. So there really isn't, it's more agnostic when it comes to an authoritarian government. But people are just looking for stability. Now, I was intrigued, and one of the first things I thought about when you mentioned, at least the background with regard to the senator from Australia, I was thinking of Huey Long, which is an example, at least on the American side, from Louisiana. And his advent during another uncertain time period in the United States, which was back in the 30s, when we were facing the Great Depression. Now, clearly now we are not looking, at least globally, that kind of economic doomsday, but rather we are in an uncertain time, which I know my other colleagues are going to get to. Part of it, which is this blockchain technology, and part of it is AI. But what I can say is this, is that there are kernels of truth in terms of, because there's always a lesson in everything. And to the extent that people are concerned and uncertain, and they may immediately flock to something that they can feel secure, whether it's nationalism or some other form of unifying ideology, The question becomes, what are the underlying reasons? Now, if in the case of, as you described, a gap or divide between the elites and the working class, well, therein lies the lesson. It's called, narrowing that gap and making the economic benefits in society more democratic, and or taking out the mystery so that people don't feel like they're oppressed. Because that's one of the things that you can get to when you unlock any kind of ideology. So I would say just off the bat that my initial reaction is that I think that's the way they're looking at it. And quite frankly, for the rest of us, when we just come along and we say that, we are shocked and find it abhorrent that people would run to one extreme or the other, it's rather that we're missing the salient lesson. And the salient lesson is, what is the inequality that's driving their fears? We can find what the kernel of that insecurity is that's funneling or the foundation of their fears. Then we can get at the root of the problem collectively as a society, whether it's economic instability or inequality or giving political voice. I think you referenced that perhaps sometimes people just want to be heard. So with that having been said, I am certainly going to defer to my colleagues on the blockchain technology. And Sharif, if I happen to have a chance later on, I was just going to try to bring a public policy portion to this discussion with my August collection of friends. Dr.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. William. Thank you, Dr. William. Thank you, Professor Adrian, for your publications. And now I request Professor Rob, how you want to analyze. And I'm really, really happy because we are getting a very, very good feedback from around the world, especially how our scholars, our mentors, our board of advisors contributing through World Talent Economy Forum, especially your analysis becomes so popular. And they are also requesting that how they can involve and engage with our scholar. I'm sure they have their social media. All of the professor, they are very active in social media. The government bodies and the corporation, those who want to directly communicate with our professors and mentors, you directly can communicate, because we are getting very good response from different institutions. And beside that, if you want to go through the World Talent Economy Forum, I'm open, and I'm sure our professors, our consultant, and our researchers, our mentors, they are happy to serve for developing nations. Professor Rob, how you want to analyze blockchain economy?
And we can finally get to the topic. I do think we probably should get to the topic earlier in the conversation, only because if we tell people it's going to be about blockchain and then we start off for the first 15 minutes and talk about something else, I'm afraid we're going to lose a lot of the audience. Anyway, blockchain is a distributed ledger. It was created before cryptocurrency, but it's really what made cryptocurrency possible. You needed a way to do a transaction that could be trusted, and what blockchain does is it provides a trusted method to do a transaction where both the seller and the buyer have been third-party validated, and the seller and buyer don't have to be identified to each other, so the transaction can be anonymous. It's cryptographically protected. So another aspect of it is security, but the biggest impact is in prevention of fraud, which is why the banks like it quite a bit at the moment. So fraud protection is good. Security is important. It has been breached, though. Law enforcement has found a way to get access to the ledgers and to trace down transactions. But it's an expensive process, and certainly a lot harder to do than almost any other type of transaction that we operate, like a credit card transaction, and particularly a check transaction in terms of anonymity. So it's a powerful product, and particularly a powerful powerful technology to address fraud predominantly, and it's grown very popular outside of cryptocurrency now. It is broadly used in banking for secure transactions.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
Okay, let me unmute here. Oh, I'm unmuted
Yes.
already. Hello. Well, yeah, Rob gave a great basic explanation for it. In some ways, I'm not that excited by it because really it's just an accounting tool. But I think that it's a lot it can be a lot faster, because when you're doing banking transactions right now, the way that it's been working for a long time is that they kind of put the transaction in escrow in these things called clearinghouses. So it's been traditional, if you want to send money to somebody else, you send it to the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse makes sure you really have both parties really can do it, and then they do the transaction. So it can take days, and or you have to pay a hefty fee for it. Like I buy some stuff, some Hago or Tongo or someplace like that, and it's $45 if I want it to get there overnight. So the cryptocurrency is a much better way to do that. I want to make one interesting point about cryptocurrency, which is kind of next to it being blockchain, which is that it's very, very, very popular among people that want to be outside of the system. And there was a early use of blockchain was a company called Silk Road. And Silk Road would allow you to buy drugs online. And since the payment was obfuscated by using blockchain, they couldn't really tell where the money was coming from, except they could eventually. And they, grabbed a guy and he's in prison forever. And so that's one of the uses of it. But I also want to say there's a whole other periphery, which are basically terrorists or what they call in the United States, they call themselves sovereign citizens. And there's these quackos that believe that income taxes are unconstitutional and that they have to arm themselves for an ultimate battle with the government and various kinds of things like that. I've met several of these people. And so they're very, very excited, and libertarians in general are very excited about the idea that they can have a financial system that's independent of governments, because they have a whole theory that that you can't really stabilize currency, that the Federal Reserve just prints money, and all these various theories that are based on a very naive understanding of economics, or a very partial understanding of economics. But there's one key thing that's interesting. If they want to be independent of government and they want to do something like some sort of a contract, and a simple contract is you buy a car, okay? So you take your cryptocurrency and you buy a car, and the person says, well, F you, I'm not going to give you the car. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to be able to go to the sheriff and say, hey, they didn't give me my car? And they're going to go, well, how many dollars? Where's the receipt for the dollars that you paid for it? It says, well, I don't have that because I sneakily did this with cryptocurrencies. We're going to have to integrate this system with the governments in order to be able to enforce contracts and other kinds of things that you don't think about immediately when you're thinking about money and currency. So I'll let it go at that for now.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Mr. Stewart, you are from blockchain industry. So how you want to share your experience with our audience?
Okay, can you hear me? I had to change microphones, so hopefully that works now. You can hear me. Good. Okay. So, just to pick up kind of back from the beginning, because there's been some really interesting points made so far. So, blockchain economy obviously primarily is about the construction around of the cryptocurrency and the development of an economic evolvement using an alternative kind of criteria. And I think, you're absolutely right what Professor Rob was just saying, that, this is about, something that's been very popular with those wanting to be out of the system. However, we have to kind of understand that, what we're talking about in terms of cryptocurrency and what we're talking about in terms of blockchain technology is that blockchain technology is slowly becoming part of that system. And in fact, that is rapidly increasing. I want to kind of give a little bit of a kind of context in terms of what we do and to help understand it. So, there's a number of areas to consider when looking at how blockchain economy evolves. So there's, first of all, the political confrontation. We have this kind of perspective around how government, rightly so, wherever you are in the world, will be unsure about, how something that's so different and so transparent could actually apply through the norms of society. So, you're going to get this kind of quite interesting perspective around this, especially when it comes to cryptocurrencies and potentially how they could impact on so many different areas around decentralization of, stable kind of fiat money. And I think there's an interesting perspective. I mean, obviously the recent news around what El Salvador have suggested in terms of are pushing around to permit Bitcoin to become kind of mainstream that way. And you can see some of these kind of on the fringe type or countries and organizations and companies saying, well, even Elon Musk for a period, said Bitcoin you could buy a Tesla with. I think hasn't come back to that yet again, is he? I think he's said no now, but it's bound to come back again. It's all toing and froing, but the big factor I'm coming to is it's about civic society. So civic society needs an ability to be able to build trust with the financial system again. And blockchain economy, not just cryptocurrencies, but the blockchain economy is providing an opportunity to say, how can we do this? I'm not saying it's the silver bullet and the answer, but how can we do this? So there are particular circumstances where you can see this as having a bit of an impact. It's not about just investing in some Bitcoin and watching it go up and down and trying to make some money. It's about how you can utilize that. And I can remember being at a blockchain summit in Singapore in 2018, where all the exhibitors and everything else paid by Bitcoin. That's back 3.5 years ago. It's been going on for a while. It's slowly seeping into mainstream, and it's slowly being accepted in many areas. But the key factor is not because cryptocurrencies are going to replace those mainstream currencies. It's because the technology is offering an element of efficiency, which is something which does actually create costs elsewhere sometimes, and also has raised concerns around in terms of mining and environmental impact. And there's a whole range of things we can talk about there as well. But also the fact that it doesn't create trust. I think people always think, blockchain, that means you can trust it. No, that's wrong. What it does, it provides the opportunity to be able to look at aspects of it that could evolve into a more trusting environment. So when I talk about that, I mean, we talk about currency all the time, blockchain, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, blockchain, Bitcoin, it goes on and on. Actually, there's a whole range around this widening market of tokenization. And tokenization has a different focus on that basis, because actually that's creating a whole new environment around the economy. So it's not about replacing mainstream currencies. It's about getting efficiency and use around data and information that's being validated and stored that has a value in another format, whether it be something like a solar coin, or whether it be something relative to another factor that gives value to society today. So what I'm trying to get to here is that there's no ultimate shift from the mainstream economy today to a blockchain economy. But the blockchain economy is going to add some value to this early on that will really help people to understand that it's not just about this currency transfer. It's about the value that the data is starting to bring forward that. And, Rob, you said about the security, I think it was, actually it was yourself, it's about security. You're absolutely, I mean, this is trying to offer some kind of security there. I think it's trying to offer some kind of perspective on this. And the way I see it evolving in the shorter term is what we're seeing now is this kind of hybrid solution development. So how we're trying to see that, let's not just take here and move to here. Let's think about how we can create some kind of hybrid functionality so that we can start to understand how we can move forward with this. Because believe me, it's not going away. And I see tokenization, which has kind of gone past this shifted kind of silliness it had a couple of years ago and is now becoming quite serious in many factors, as being more and more mainstream. And the one word that comes from that is education. We need to now develop the education of this. So how can we, and we're doing it today, Sharif, we're sitting here talking about this from all different walks of life and experiences. We need to now help people to educate them and understand why and where and how this could be so effective.
Thank you. Mr. Ramlan, you are from halal market, halal industries, and it's a $5 trillion economy, especially from the Muslim world. So how you want to analyze the impact of blockchain technology in halal market.
Okay. Good evening, guys. Thank you, Sharif. Donald, the movie Silk Road is going to be on tomorrow night in Saigon. I am based in Vietnam currently. I'm Malaysian, but based in Saigon, so I would definitely want to watch Silk Road tomorrow night at 9 p.m. on Fox Movie Channel. So we'll take a look tomorrow. Okay, what happened here is um, halal is going on a transformation. Yeah, if you look at when we have blockchain helps definitely for traceability for halal. A lot of the processes that is being done in halal are in the infancy stage. If you look from the blockchain point of view, I'll give you an example of Malaysia because majority of the processes are done do not use blockchain, and when that happens, the trust, the processes tends to go haywire because sometimes there are a lot of companies would like to go into the halal market because halal market is so big, and yet without a proper traceability, it will erode the trust of halal products. I came to Vietnam 2.5 years ago, looking at the potential in Vietnam. Vietnam has got an enormous agricultural products, manufacturing products, and the only thing missing link is the halal standards. Given Vietnam is not a Muslim country, but if I can impress upon the panelists tonight, 70% of the halal production in the world are being produced by non-Muslim. Currently, number one is Nestle. Nestle does a huge production facilities. Out of the 300 over factories around the world, the halal centers are in Malaysia, the R&D in Malaysia. And I believe by incorporating blockchain right from production processes to transportation, right up to packaging, the end-to-end process would enhance the trust, which currently, if you look at in this part of the world, recently I found a lot of the products that is coming in from Korea, from Japan, consumer products with a halal logo. But why would a product from Korea or Japan have a halal logo in Vietnam? Muslim population in Vietnam is not even 1%. I think it's about 150,000 out of a 98 million population. But what happened here is because of the far-sightedness, people are looking at halal as a symbol of quality, and I believe by getting blockchain into the what we call in halal is from farm to fork, this would help and enhance more trajectory in terms of acceptance, and also I'm looking at from product from Vietnam to be able to be exported to a more marketplace in the world. So that's my take on blockchain, Sharif. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, I give you the chance. Before that, Professor Adrian, I know he has some important appointment. What's your a closing remarks for blockchain economy, Professor Adrian?
Yes, sorry, it's not so important point. It's midnight here in Australia. I have to finish some work before the weekend. But it's just unfortunately we're in such different time zones. I just want to say about the blockchain that someone keeps asking what's a block in blockchain. So please answer that question, whoever's expert.
Yes.
All right. I agree. I tend to agree with Professor Donald that blockchain is essentially a kind of accounting. So when it sounds very magical to the general public, but I think for engineers and computer scientists, it's essentially some kind of ledgering system, although it's quite sophisticated. But yes, maybe it is a little bit hyped up in the general public, and whereas a lot of computer scientists maybe don't find it so exciting as the general public does. But there's I think when the general public think of blockchain, they don't really think so much about for example, what Mr. Ramlan just said about halal food. So you could see one application of blockchain would be to trace the food to the source and make sure it's totally halal for the meat or processed food or whatever. So that you can see that's an application of the blockchain. But honestly speaking, if you tell this to the 99% of the people, they would just think about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So that's what most people think blockchain is all about. And then if we think about I'm not totally sure what will happen with the cryptocurrency, but a very good friend of mine, Professor Kenichiro Mogi, he's a famous professor in Japan. He constantly says that the value of Bitcoin is zero. It will eventually go to zero sooner or later. And his rationality is every other currency in the world, let's say US dollar, the value comes from not from the paper that it's printed on. It comes from the value of the whole US government, the military of the US government, the economy of the US economy. So the value of a $1 bill is nothing to do with the value of the piece of paper that it's printed on. It's to do with the whole of the US government, including military and every aspect. So he says the value of Bitcoin is essentially based on nothing. So he predicts Bitcoin will go to zero. On the other hand, I'm just looking at Yahoo Finance now, and on the screen, and the Bitcoin is $47,000. So I don't know what the final answer is, but we're going to see sooner or later whether Bitcoin was the red, the tulips of Netherlands, I think 200 or 300 years ago, where tulips had some massive value and then it suddenly crashed to zero. Okay, so sooner or later we're going to see whether Bitcoin is like the tulips of the 21st century, or really Bitcoin is some kind of gold. Gold is a similar thing. It doesn't really have any use apart from it looks very beautiful. But sooner or later, I think we're going to see, and I can't really predict myself, but I'm just telling the two views that I can see. One is, people are saying Bitcoin will go to zero, and well-knowledge people are saying that, and other people are saying no, it's going to become some kind of storage of value. And I don't know what will happen in the future, but I want to say myself, I don't own any Bitcoin because I personally don't know what is going to happen with Bitcoin in the future. But like I said, blockchain is a much bigger topic than Bitcoin. But for the majority of the public, they will think cryptocurrency, and so that's one issue that we think about together with this topic. And so I'm sure it's a great topic. And please, someone answer that question to the student. He asked, "What is the block in blockchain?" Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Adrian. Professor David Smith, there is a question from audience. If you give the answer, even after Professor David Smith, anybody can answer. What is the block in blockchain? Thank you, Mr. Mohsin.
Mr. Mohsin asked a great question there, and I apologize. My whole neighborhood lost internet earlier, and it took a while to get it back. Um, Blockchain's a very interesting approach when you look at. Let me first start though that saying in 2020, blockchain was about $3.7 billion market. And what's amazing to me is it's growing between now and they're projecting 2028 at 82% compound annual growth. That's an astronomical growth there. So the blocks and blockchains is a really very simple view as you begin to go back and look at the blockchains and how it's put together. In many ways, blockchain got started back actually in the 90s, even though it wasn't called blockchain, with distributed computing. And the blockchain concept, again, not being called blockchain, actually began researching universities in about 1999. And then it first came up as a concept as blockchain in 2008. A good way of thinking about it is a distributed ledger, but in a distributed computer way, think about it as databases linked to databases, linked to databases, linked to databases. In each of those blocks, each of those databases is the block that is linked together to create the blockchain. So that block where the data resides is the database of all the transactions that it stores up until that time. The largest block today out on the internet is almost 700,000 entries within that block. So you can see that those blocks are beginning to get large, and they're beginning to get where the smart contracts built around them are becoming more complex in many of the instances like that where the blocks have gotten that large. The other thing that's real interesting to look at in this is the concept of the distributed ledger with the block, because Donald did a great job of talking through the accounting part of blockchain. But when you go back and look at the ledger, the distributed ledger, ledgers confirm ownership. The blockchain ledger really confirms the ownership as it goes through it. It confirms identity. It confirms status, who has the rights and what obligations and stuff going through it. Where it's still working a little bit is ledgers confirm authority. And that's where the regulation and other things are working through it. But one of the very interesting things about blockchain that's not talked about a lot is at the most fundamental level, these distributed ledgers map economic and social relationships. And an important part of a blockchain is that it maps all those ledger functions, it maps those relationships in a way that's very hard to compromise. One of the ways it contains part of the security is each of those blocks, which are distributed in some of the systems, have to be in sync. So let's say that Rob decided to go back and in his block modify something. Instead of him having a 40% ownership of this, he changes it to 80% in his block. Well, at least 51% of the other blocks would have to agree with that change. Otherwise, his change in his block would be discarded. So that is the way the blocks in blockchain work to give you a level of security. Now, there are ways to compromise that, but it takes a lot of expertise and work and money to be able to do that. The other thing that I haven't heard that I think is important on this is you look a little bit at the types of blockchains. You know, there's public and private and hybrid blockchains, and all of those have different ways. Public's accessible, private's only to the participants, and hybrids has some going both ways. What's important about that is some of the public blockchains really in some ways have more accountability than the private ones, but the private blockchains have more security built around them. And accountability and security are two different principles. But it really goes back to the question that he asked, is the block as they are chained together is the important part of understanding blockchain. And it is where the smart contracts come in place. It's where the linkages come in place. The more simultaneous blocks you have in your blockchain, the harder it is to compromise it. And particularly in financial, you see that. The other thing that I really find interesting in blockchain is how the companies have begun to get behind it and how it begins to work in that decentralized manner. And some of the largest companies in the world are now actively building blockchains for people. Some that really surprised me as you go back and look at. But the other key to what's seeing it's happening is 4 of the major banks in Singapore and the government there have announced that they are building the first NASDAQ-like blockchain exchange. So we're beginning to see it where it now has a more of a way to reach a mass market than it had before, where it was more specialized. So, Sharif, I hope that helped answer the question.
Thank you, Dr. William. There is another question from audience. I think it's from Mr. Dan. What are some other distributed computing staking proof protocols beside the energy-hungry proof of work used by Bitcoin? Dr. William, can you unmute? Unmute, please.
Okay, yeah, Dan, I'm glad you're watching. But Rob, you're up because this is beyond my pay grade.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, since the top, I really want to stop people from connecting cryptocurrency to blockchain. They were introduced together. But blockchain actually pre-existed cryptocurrency. It was the concept that hit first, and you could certainly argue that cryptocurrency couldn't exist without blockchain. But blockchain can be used for any form of transaction. It is basically a distributed ledger. And so if you wanted to exchange a chicken for a bull, not that that'd be a great exchange, but after you want hell of a chicken, you could use blockchain to do that. If you wanted to exchange one car for another, you could use blockchain to do that. All it does is it helps assure that the seller has what he's selling and the buyer has whatever it is they're going to supply when they're buying, and create a distributed transaction which can't be altered by either of the two parties. It makes fraud incredibly difficult. And when you're talking about something like a piece of currency that isn't backed by a government, much like my bad chicken versus bull acquisition process, then it's kind of critical that you somehow you have a very high level of assurance on the transaction. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you're planning on getting, or the other person is going to get what they're planning on getting. So all this does is just assure the transaction. Cryptocurrency is just one of the things that benefited from it, and I could certainly argue that cryptocurrency couldn't exist without blockchain, but blockchain certainly can exist without cryptocurrency. And I think it's exceedingly confusing to tie the two together as hard as we are. As hard as many people are, because blockchain is in wide use in banking now, and cryptocurrency is not. And so there are places that adopted one country has adopted it, has not been working out so well so far. So in the end, I really feel strongly that we should keep cryptocurrency off into another discussion, because the confusion between cryptocurrency and blockchain is pretty pronounced, and otherwise we're proliferating that discussion. So let's take cryptocurrency questions to a cryptocurrency topic, and let's if at all possible, let's stay with blockchain on this one.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Yes, Dr. William.
Oh, okay. Well, so I didn't know the answer to Dan's question, but I do want to point out that Rob's absolutely right, because I didn't have that answer. I mean, let's just to augment what Rob talked about. essentially with blockchain, because its inherent benefit is verifying and or injecting trust into peer-to-peer transactions. These are the areas that we can, kind of look at. When Ramlin talked about supply chains and logistics and verifying the process, what I believe as he referred to as farm to fork. We can also think about those other areas in society where you need to verify from beginning to end the authenticity of whatever the product or service or agreement in terms of contracts that you're talking about. In this case, one of the specific applicable areas would be in oceanographic conservation, overfishing. So if you want to determine, where fish are coming from, and you employ blockchain, you can track them from the time where they were harvested to the time that they wherever they end up, and that's a means of enforcing and or possibly being a benefit to overfishing. So that's one other area. But essentially, you got to think about it in any area in society where trust is at a premium. Now, with blockchain in particular, what it does is one of the reasons why it augments this trust and authenticity is simply because of the redundancy that Dave spoke of. And it's that redundancy across the decentralized nature of the ledger accounting that Donald referred to that is the basis for where things should go. But a couple of different things. In developing nations in particular, Sharif, to the extent that they don't have and or it's unreliable real estate transactions, so that moving from paper transactions, which may get lost or burned up or are subject to the vagaries of war or crime or corruption, to the extent that real estate transactions can add stability to real estate purchases and selling in developing nations. That's another area where you can look to blockchain as a potential solution. Now, with that, I want to give others a chance to speak, but there's a whole lot more. But Dr. Sharif.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stewart. I think you are from industry, maybe you can connect, but definitely if like Bitcoin, definitely it's a different issue. We will discuss today on blockchain economy.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine, and I totally understand that. And Rob, I love your T-shirt, by the way. Arguing with a fool. I think when it comes to blockchain, it's one of those things you think you must have picked that T-shirt for today. There's no doubt about it. It's wonderful. I think there we go. They're going to get that one. They prove there are two. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Oh dear me. I love that. That's wonderful. So, okay, let's step away from what cryptocurrencies are. I mean, first of all, I think there's been a number of really good descriptions around blockchains and blocks. I'm not going to necessarily repeat, but that block, which is the data and information, which is the present data stored that relates to its past and the future, that is inadvertently put into that chain and held, and therefore cannot be changed. It's traceable, and this is the key factor here. And you're right, there's a huge amount. We produce so much data today. One of the great advantages of blockchain coming about now with blockchain is that we can now start to find this data. We can use hashtag technology to be able to create an ability to trace back down data and know it's there. And that's one of the little kind of things that come from it. So I thought that helped. There's a couple of things I wanted to pick up on, actually. First one was about some of the history around use of blockchain away from currencies. So diamonds was an always interesting one. We've got Everledger, where they were saying, look, okay, here's a high value product that we know has a major issue in terms of environmental, social, and governance issues. There's a whole range of things. If we can prove that this diamond, has a traceability such that has gone through all the right kind of perspectives and has not been mined by children under the age of 5, and several people have died on the way to it, and all the other problems that come from mining and diamond mining and all the other factors around this, especially the blood diamond market as it is, this is something that strengthens this whole focus. We can take a technology and make it good for society, and that is something that is really allowing blockchain to drive its way forward. Now, Mr. Ramlan, mashallah, I work in the Sharia compliance area myself, so I understand this. And our focus obviously is financial services. I have a business. I'm Chief Investment Officer of Simply Ethical. We are a Sharia compliant investment firm. We have a business out in Malaysia, as Sharif knows. And we do a lot of look around this because there's a lot of questions around: is this technology? Is it halal? Is it, it's a question we get asked on a frequent basis. And we say, well, actually, it's a bit like saying, is driving a car halal? Well, it depends, why and what you're driving. I mean, the whole point behind this is you're absolutely right. One of the factors that's made halal blockchain become really interesting is that there are certain factors and focuses around not just, and let's say example of, people think of halal, they think of chicken or meat, lamb, whatever, and they always think about the slaughter process. But we always talk about the main focus around the care of the animal as well. And if you're able to say, well, actually, part of the necessity for halal is that you need the ability to be able to track and trace that as well and validate that data. So I think there's a really, really good kind of number of aspects that come from that. And I'm very supportive in terms of general environmental, social and governance perspectives using blockchain. It's a shame Adam's not here at the moment. I was going to say to him, he brought the example of tulips up. I was going to say to him, well, tulips are still sold today. So don't forget that, they didn't disappear. I have tulips in my garden. I buy bulbs regularly. So, and he related to gold. And I think gold's interesting because gold, part of the value of gold is its scarcity and limited amount. And that's why, the cryptocurrencies have been. But I want to move just slightly on from this, because I think if we just talk about the technology, I think we're on a winning streak here. I'm amazed at how many times I come across processes, organizations, industries, and they are using blockchain already. So my view is it's a bit like, again, getting into the car and saying, I have no idea how an internal combustion engine works, but I turn the key and I drive off. As long as I put petrol in one end, I can go forward. And, I don't worry too much about how the pistons work and how it mixes there and all the other factors. Actually, the factor here is that the technology of blockchain is being instrumental in part or all of a lot of processes already for a number of different reasons around efficiency, transferability, traceability, and validity. And this is really, really good. And I think we need to kind of recognize that. The fact I want to bring in here is that we also need to recognize that we mustn't lose sight of the benefit of tokenization, because I think tokenization will be then the real, what I call, whiz factor to this, because it's going to be able to create the use of data and information and give a value to that, not in necessarily a currency format, but a value in how important it is to society. And that's what we've got to get around. There's a big education piece here. And I think today we could talk a lot about this, but the taxonomy of this is going to be a really big factor to come and play in this, because that way we can start to understand how the technology is actually driving the product. It's not the end product. It's driving what we need. And with the climate crisis and all the other social issues going around the world, modern day slavery is a fine example of that. Blockchain may be the opportunity to resolve that. So there we go. I mean, I'm going to pause there because there's so much. I could talk for an hour on this. Maybe another time, Sharif, another time.
Thank you. Mr. Ramlan, as there are some point related to this halal market, I have a question in mind. Like, now economy has a lot of challenges. Every country has a lot of challenges, even Malaysia and other countries has challenges. Do you believe that blockchain technology actually helps to overcome from this challenging situation, or it will create more transparency and more stable economy?
I tell you one good example, Sharif. Last year, Jakim in Malaysia faces challenges in the sense that there's a lot of fraudulence. There are a lot of logos are being duplicated and printed freely. I think if you use blockchain, you would have avoided that a long time ago. So to me, yes, because that traceability part, it is an integral portion in halal standards. What I've heard, they are going to implement this a new system for Jakim, because I think Jakim have given certification to almost close to about 45 to 50 countries. All over the world are getting the halal certification from Jakim. but the technology is not being used. So I believe by having blockchain in place, this will help eradicate. As Stuart was saying, the compliance part is the trust. No point buying meat or some other products coming from any country for that matter, and it says halal. But unfortunately, because of the big bucks, because of the cartel, because of the involvement with so many people, and I like to say that sometimes people are not so halal, but they do halal business, and this affect the credibility of halal in itself. So yes, it would help tremendously, and I would like to see halal, Jakim and other certification bodies in the world come up with technology. They can't be doing the old-fashioned way anymore. It doesn't work that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramlan. Professor David Smith and Professor Donald, I think both of you can share your views on this question. Professor Hayes, he asked, what are some career opportunities in blockchain field? Where can someone receive educational training in this area? Professor David Smith.
Great question, because where you can get education training in so many different ways. And Stuart made one of the very important parts here as he discussed ledgers as part of the key in using the blockchain. The first mention of ledgers was on a clay tablet from many, many years BC. So the concept of ledgers is one that has deep history. To understand blockchain, a student must really understand the concept of ledgers first and begin to understand ledgers. They need to understand the concept of distributed computing and distributed databases, because that helps you begin to pull how the blockchain is used and populated. Many of the blockchains are very peer-to-peer. So you have to really begin to go back and look at how you go and do that and where they are actually implemented. Many of the training courses in blockchain are not solid academic programs yet in universities. Many of them are more in the coding academies, the other academies like that today. But to understand it, it's understanding the multiple implicities of that. The coding of a blockchain is very straightforward and can be picked up in a coding academy in a matter of weeks, semesters. But the basis of smart contracts, a little bit more involved. The basis of the regulatory impacts, where there are regulatory impacts, a little bit more involved. The cryptography that is particularly in private blockchains, again, that's a whole different academic area you have to begin to understand. But the different types are there to begin to see them. One of the more interesting programs I've seen is actually one that we run into as an IBM partner. And IBM has a lot of effort going into blockchain programming. In fact, the IBM group of people in Asia is one of the largest programming groups in IBM, and they're dedicated towards blockchain. But they have a good program. I can go to many of the others. Even Microsoft and Google have blockchain programming groups within their companies. So it really is a very widely addressed there. There are many materials online. Unity, the online school, others like that have online programs explicitly training in blockchain. So there's a lot of ways a student, a business leader, an entrepreneur can go and find training explicitly directed towards what they want to do and their knowledge level of what they want to do with it. Because not everyone needs to be able to build a blockchain exchange to use blockchain. You just need to be able to understand how to use a blockchain or how to build a chain that is used in other exchanges. So that's my simple answer.
Thank you, Professor David. Professor Donald.
I want to point out that there's different levels to it depending on what you like to do and what you want to do. No one has really mentioned blockchain wallets. And blockchain wallets are the basically user interface that people use to be able to access blockchain. If I would, put my money into a blockchain wallet, which I'd have on my some device on my PC or on my mobile device, and those have been pretty darn clunky. And so that can be a user interface, which is one type of computing that you can get into if you enjoy that stuff and like it. If you're looking down to the distributed computing, I've taught that, and I find that a really good way to learn it is to start with just the simple Unix file system, because they use blocks and indexing. It's very, very clear and very easy to understand. And then what winds up happening is that you just start expanding that. So instead of writing everything on one disk, you're writing things on multiple disks, and how you index it and grab it and stuff like that is really just an evolution from the Unix file system. So I'd recommend that if you want to understand it. Of course, when you think about it, you think about some sort of a system like Facebook or like the system where, what we're using here. It's distributed across the whole entire world. We're from everywhere here, but yet it's instant. And so the kind of programming that it takes to be able to make everything happen at the same time it's a system level programming. It's really interesting. That's the part of it I like the most. And I will tell you that the language that they use right now at Facebook is Rust, and Rust looks a lot like C, and it's a systems programming language, and it's something that you use when you're doing things like writing file systems and stuff like that. So and I also want to answer the question about energy. Now, Elysium has a different way of doing it than the old style, and it charges basically for how much power you're using or how much computing power you're using. So if you use more computing power, it costs you more to do the transactions. So that means that the programmers have a very strong incentive to use the APIs in ways that reduce the amount of power that you're using. And so it's a very great economic incentive. I mean, that's a brilliant way to do it, because you're not bossing people around. You're providing an incentive to be able to do it. And so that starts getting down at the level where you're interfacing to it, and that's at the wallet level, where you're talking about the APIs. I also do want to say that if you look at something like Amazon, and if you are ordering something from Amazon, it'll tell you exactly where the stuff that you're ordering is. It's still in the warehouse. It's been tagged that it's going to come to you. It's been put on the truck. It's on the airplane. It's in a center in Lodi or wherever like that, which is perfect kind of application for blockchain when you think about it, because everything is traced. Nobody can pilfer it. It's absolutely traced every step of the way in ways that can't be altered. So that's an example that you can then do the same thing if you're a company or an organization that has material that you're moving from one place to another inside your organization. Blockchain is a fabulous way of keeping track of exactly where everything is, so nobody can pilfer anything, and if it gets misplaced, you'll know exactly where it got misplaced. And I want to say one last thing is, Rob gave a fabulous example of why it's difficult to separate the cryptocurrency from blockchain. He talked about exchanging a chicken for a bull, and that's the deal with money. Is we might have the exchange of saying, well, no, a bull is really worth 76 chickens or something like that, or 176 chickens. We can barter like that, but you run into time issues. Like if you're changing chickens for a cart, well, you only need a new cart every 10 years. And so what we've done as a society and a world is we've used money as an index into these different kinds of things so that we can make these exchanges in a fluid way. And so that's why it's important and necessary, because it's an index that we use for basically bartering. And on that track is we can do the contracts online, but we still have to enforce the contracts. So right now, I just looked at the Federal Reserve, and they're discussing, and they will before too long have a crypto dollar. And once a government like the United States gets into the business of having dollars, they can maintain the scarcity. Which is what one of the things they do with dollars. They could maintain the legal enforcement of contracts, and I think that is going to be a big hit to Bitcoin, because if you are trading chickens for bulls and the currency that you're using has changed its value by a margin of 10% between the time you made the agreement and the time you actually make the exchange, that gets into a gambling situation rather than an exchange in any particular way that you'd want to have it. And if countries like the United States and the EU and stuff start getting into having a cryptocurrency that they manage to keep stable, I think people are going to switch, and and contracts and things can be enforced. I think we're going to see things like Bitcoin being less valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an excellent discussions, and I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. I want to start from Dr. William. Dr. William.
Yes, I was just taking care of that. There were a couple of quick things, and if I can, I'll just run through these quickly, and then I just want to make one observation. First, blockchain at its core, because of its redundancy and because of the ability to verify the unique information, whether it's diamonds, whether it's products, or whatever it is that you're shipping from end to end, is what conveys the trust in the transaction, and therein lies we're up. So essentially any transaction that occurs in the world currently that requires a degree of verification and or trust is suitable to this notion of at least considering it through the lens of blockchain application. That's one. Two. Here is the other piece that we've not yet raised with regard to blockchain, and that is its scalability. Currently, one of the attributes of blockchain as an application, when we are thinking about this in the future, is a simple notion that currently, unlike centralized institutions, they are limited in terms of the number of transactions they can do. So, for example, when you consider a central bank, it doesn't have to be the United States, doesn't have to be the European Central Bank, it can be wherever. Their ability to process transactions are limited to a certain degree. Whereas with blockchain, the scalability with regard to the transactions, once everybody is bought into the basic trust and verification of the blockchain application, can be scaled up to handle trillions of transactions in any number of areas, whether it's business production, supply, logistics, whether it's monetary functions such as Bitcoin, etc. And when you consider a world of 7 billion people and making trillions of individualized transactions, that's where one of the unexplored areas of blockchain itself begins to take effect and might have promise that's worth securing. But herein lies the other piece that we've not talked about, and it's been raised by some of my colleagues before, that one of the things that leads to the very salient piece or the attractive piece about blockchain as we examine it is this notion of trust and verification. And so earlier when we were talking about you put the data in and then it's immutable. Fantastic, we say. Eureka moment, light bulb goes off. Except what happens if my computer programmer on the 9th floor makes a mistake in the contract at the very beginning? And I can never change it. But once it's in the blockchain, it's there forever. And that mistake is gone forever. And I can never change it, or it's very difficult to change it. So one of the questions, we take that in combination with possible scalability and its application, whether into finances, supply, logistics, etc. And then I know Rob has this famous quote, and I would like to, refer to it. Sometimes progress means bad things happen faster. That a mistake gets accelerated, and then you can't change it and you can't pull it back. And so one of the downsides of blockchain is, or the Achilles heel of it, is its very immutability. So the very stability and reliability of it is, in fact, its Achilles heel, because if you make a mistake at its inception, it's carried through and it is tough. Now, I just want to make, just one other observation, and then I'm going to conclude real quickly, and that is simply this. And this really comes from a public policy portion. And one of the benefits of blockchain when it comes to monetary issues is that generally it is immune from the vagaries of the traditional business cycle. That is to say, when you have a centralized bank and we have monetary and fiscal policy, and we're getting into the economics of it, you essentially, if you're dealing with monetary policy, you have the Fed, the centralized bank, making decisions about the flow of the money, and they are reacting to a business cycle. At the point in time that you have any kind of governmental institution issuing their own Bitcoin or Bitcoin type of product, they are going to react in terms of controlling the supply of that the same way they would with dollars. And so it is a fallacy to say that, well, because the centralized bank will be in control of the money, that they will somehow be immune to the same levers and usage of the tools that they currently use to manipulate the current currencies, whether it's the euro, whether it's the dollar, regardless of the denomination, is a fallacy. And to say that somehow, because they will be in charge of it, that therefore it'll become, sacrosanct, is just an intellectual fallacy. Because the point here is that because the monetary thing, Bitcoin or whatever you want to call it, is decentralized and backed up by redundancy and is independent in terms of its effect and moves more in relationship to how people trade gold, makes it immune to manipulation by central government, which is why you can have, with any kind of denomination, fluctuations from the relative worthlessness of the Venezuelan currency versus what the perceived stability is of the American currency. So with that in mind, here are the things. The redundancy, the verification, the trust leads to the inherent value of blockchain, regardless of where it's applied. The scalability is another attractive feature, because as we increasingly have millions, billions, and trillions of transactions, but at the end of the day, the Achilles heel is if you make a mistake at the very beginning. And therein lies the rub, because as you go through the process, you can't cure the mistake. So invest in your computer programmers, and Lord knows, maybe make them financially liable, because I can tell you there are going to be a lot of attorneys out there, international attorneys, that are going to get sued when a comma is in the wrong place and it's embedded in blockchain. With that, I hand back over to my colleagues. Thank you all.
Thank you. Professor Rob.
Sorry, had to find that damn mute button again. Okay, there was a lot to unpack in that last set of comments. Just remember, blockchain is a ledger. And like any ledger, if a mistake is made at the beginning of the ledger, it's going to corrupt the entire process. It's no different than any other ledger in that regard. And in terms of speed, blockchain is actually relatively slow when it comes to electronic transactions. It's why it's not used in stock trading. It's not that it couldn't be used. I mean, you would certainly want the level of trust and other aspects of blockchain in a stock trade, but stock trades are done incredibly quickly, and blockchain is simply too slow right now to address that market. So in terms of computer speed, blockchain is actually slower than some of the other electronic methods that are already in place. Now, once again, I'd like to separate cryptocurrency from blockchain because it's a ledger. It is not inherent to cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is dependent on blockchain. Blockchain is not dependent on cryptocurrency. And clearly one thing blockchain has to do with government regulation is the fact it would be held to the same standards of integrity and protections against fraud that exists for any ledger. So if blockchain is being used to commit a crime, it's not going to protect you against that crime. And as we found when Silk Road was compromised, if a government wants to figure out what went on with blockchain in a blockchain transaction, it certainly can if it wants to put in the effort. It just is harder for them with a blockchain transaction than it would be with a traditional ledger, because a ledger is relatively simple compared to what a blockchain ledger is. So the end result is in almost every case, except for stock trading or anything that has to happen in microseconds, it is a better solution than a traditional ledger. And really, there's nothing about government regulation or anything else that adversely impacts that. You have to keep them separate. Also, when we had the discussion with regard to careers and blockchain, one of the things is if you want to get into this area, it would really help if you actually picked up a minor or some accounting courses along the way, because once again, you're working on a distributed ledger. So it helps if you understand some basics about accounting, because you're going to be implementing this in an accounting environment. And if you don't understand accounting, chances are you're going to really screw up with whatever you're going to be doing with blockchain. You need both sets of skills to both understand and implement a blockchain solution. It's not something that you can just hand off to a bunch of programmers and say, go for it, because they're probably not going to understand the problem you're trying to solve. And whenever you set forth a project, it really helps to have at least a couple people in that project that understand the environment and where it's operating. We did have that question that I kind of sidestepped on cryptocurrency and in regard to which is the most efficient. I just look up Dogecoin, DOGE coin. Right now, it's the most energy efficient of the cryptocurrencies. Ethereum is better than Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the worst, though they're working on that right now. And hopefully in a year or so, it will be much more energy efficient. That's all I want to say about cryptocurrency, but I hate to leave a question unanswered. And finally, as you're looking at these things, regardless of the nature of the technology, it does help if you drill down and understand the limits and advantages of the technology before you go much farther. Blockchain is not the right solution for every problem. Like anything else, it works best where it is best. Certainly, when you're doing a transaction where there's a high risk of fraud, the blockchain is the best we've got right now. In terms of being able to mitigate fraud, and it's better than most other methods in terms of security. So that it's why it's so widely used now in traditional banking. But understanding that takes you down a path of, if you don't really care for banking and you don't really care for accounting, this is probably not an area you want to spend a ton of time with, because you can't separate those elements. If you do like that stuff and you want to advance in finance and accounting, and get on the cutting edge, then it makes a lot of sense, because this is kind of right now the cutting edge of financial transactions. And if that interests you, then this is where you want to be. There you go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks today?
I agree with what Rob has said. It's important to really focus on the ledger, because that is really the core part of blockchain, is these distributed ledgers. And I cannot agree more heartily with his disconnecting between cryptocurrency and blockchain. there are thousands of applications of blockchain that are not cryptocurrency related at all. And as an order of magnitude, that is a big difference. Even blockchain is being proposed as a solution to have secure voting. And there's pluses and minuses for that. One of the minuses is your votes become very public and some of the privacy is taken away. But some of the plus side is you have a record that cannot be tampered with. So pluses and minuses there. But I do want to, in this part, go back to the question that was asked in the graphic, Sharif. When you look at blockchain, there's 4 primary protocols on how the different blockchains are put together and looked at. And the person who asked the question talked about the protocol called proof of work. And that is the one where there's heavy data mining on it. And that's where you see all of the costs and things associated. A second protocol is called proof of stake. And there's really minimal mining on it. What you do is on your machine, you have your stake of the block of the blockchain, and it is populated through, but that stake remains on your computer. And it's not mined like you see on proof of work. There's also a delegated proof of stake, which lets you go to a trusted authority to maintain your stake. And there's one called proof of work. And that is your contributions and things are in that protocol. So to answer your person's question, those are the 4 main protocols. The one that I see most, my holding company, we actually own part of several blockchain development companies in India, and they're seeing more and more proof of stake protocol being asked for as they're developing blockchain. So I personally think that's one of the trends we're going to see going forward, where proof of work was early, and many of the cryptocurrencies are based around proof of work protocol, but you're going to see those changes going through. If we go back to some of the other applications, like in voting and logistic management, I think you're going to see those go to delegated proof of stake, because that kind of makes sense that you have a trusted authority as part of that. And those are going to tend to be private blockchains versus a public blockchain. But I also agree with Rob heartily that accounting information is going to be important. As I said before, I think distributed computing is going to be an important consideration. And if I look at some of the programs at some of the research universities where blockchain is in the curriculum, like at University of Texas, Austin, at Rice, at MIT, at Stanford, they're beginning to put in around blockchain some of their systems of systems training as well. Because if you look at it, a distributed ledger blockchain, one of the key things that makes it powerful is a distributed systems of systems approach. And so those are the elements I see going forward. With a compound annual growth rate of 80 to 83%, there's going to be a lot of requirements for more people who can develop blockchains. There's going to be a lot of business opportunities. There's a lot of entrepreneur opportunities to build applications built around using different types of blockchains to solve a whole multitude of business cases, of public policy cases, and others. So the future's bright using blockchain, and it's one where you're geographically located has little to do with the success of what you're trying to do. So Sharif, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Donald. Unmute, yeah.
I do want to say that if you actually do bookkeeping, errors creep in, and the way that you fix them, it isn't that you erase them and correct them. You actually make another entry, which is a correction. So the idea that errors creep into the blockchain is really it's nothing. So that's and I also really agree that, you know, blockchain is all those things across, but we're talking about trust. We have to realize that at least my view of trust has to realize that it's kind of the glue that holds society together. When you go into a gas station and start pumping gas and you haven't paid, there's a degree of trust that you're going to actually go and pay. I mean, everywhere that we work, there's trust, and we even in language, when we say something, we have to trust that the person's saying things that are accurate. So just even to use language, we have to have trust. And I don't think that blockchain solves the problem of somebody being a criminal and just, you know, blowing off the transaction, because especially if they're bigger and meaner than you are. I mean, you know, Boris and Guido just decide they're not going to pay you. There isn't a lot you can do if they tell you they're going to come and break your legs, if, you know, tough. And so I think that, you know, the whole idea that it's a good solid ledger is the core to it. And again, when we get into governments going back to even though we're not supposed to, back to cryptocurrency, historically business cycles have been killer, and they can get into places where there's problems that you can't get out of. So Japan got into a problem that with their real estate market in the 90s that crashed their economy for decades. And one of the ways that that's prevented is by the federal government controlling the money supply. And what that means is that they control the interest rates, which that banks can borrow money from the Federal Reserve. And because of that, they can have less money in circulation. So like right now, the United States has pretty high inflation. And so there's some question about whether or not the Federal Reserve might raise the interest rates in order to make inflation go away or reduce it. And inflation is bad for everyone because, well, not necessarily everyone, but inflation is kind of bad for most people because the money that they have becomes worth less. It's not worth as much as it was. And so that in countries like Argentina, they had inflation so bad that as soon as you got paid, you ran to the store and bought whatever you could, because the next day your money would be worth so much less that you couldn't buy nearly as much as you could on the next day as you did on one day. And government control of currency does help stabilize that. So I would like to see government-controlled cryptocurrencies. But, you know, all I really want to say is that, yeah, they're great for ledgers. And if you have a person that's writing a ledger with pencils, they can erase it and they can change things. And that's not the way you're supposed to do accounting. So cryptocurrency does force accurate ledgers, which is a good thing. And there.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
I thank you for this, Sharifa, and some really good aspects. This is a really another great topic. Every topic you do is great, and the speakers always make fantastic contributions. And yeah, I'm slightly kind of scared now about Boris and Guido turning up and breaking my knees with a blockchain of some sort. I'm not sure how it's going to translate, but it's interesting because, you know, going back to what you were saying about the gas station, Donald, you know, I mean, you know, when I go and pay for what we call petrol over here, gas, and hopefully I'll be charging my electric car from home soon. You know, I swipe my card and I've kind of paid for it before I've even put anything in. So it's interesting how gas stations don't trust us anymore over here. And I think this is the whole point. What I want to get to the point is that the way I see blockchain, we can't take the cryptocurrency out of blockchain. I think we have to, even though the discussion today for its health factor was a really important thing we did there. You cannot remove the currency, the cryptocurrency from the blockchain, because they are inextricably linked. They have developed alongside each other and they have a role to play together. And the reason I say that is because, without Bitcoin, would we have had blockchain? Well, yeah, we might have done, but it would have felt and looked very different. And I think, this has been its kind of, let's say, it's kind of PR cousin, shall we say, I feel. People kind of, well, they don't know what Bitcoin is. I don't think anybody truly understands what Bitcoin is. But if you say to someone Bitcoin, they kind of go, oh, yes, Bitcoin. Yeah, and even quite often I meet people who go, yes, I own some Bitcoin. They don't know where it is, but they own some, 0.00001 or something of a Bitcoin. But when you're talking about blockchain technology, they kind of get a little bit lost with it. And they don't really care about it, actually, in some respects. So, my view about this is going forward is that there are three factors coming to play here. One is it's creating change, and whether it's change for good or bad is something that we will decide as we go on this journey. I like to think change is for good, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. Change is for good for society, for civic society, for transparency, and all the factors around this. It's also about innovation. We are looking always to innovate the way we work and the way we deal with things. And I think blockchain has brought a level of innovation that is second to none in many, many ways. It's, people liken blockchain to what the internet felt like back in the kind of early 90s, shall we say. And it's like, and if that's the case, we are very, very early at the stage of its development. It also brings forward empowerment. And I think this is the key factor. The education will play a big role in this. It can bring forward an opportunity to allow people to understand how it becomes part of their life. And I think that's really key. It can bring new jobs. It can bring greater speed and efficiency. It can bring traceability, validity, opportunity for trust. And I think let's view this from a really positive viewpoint, and let's see how this can and grow forward. But there is a little sting in the tail here. And we've said a lot of these things, and I'm not going to repeat anything from what people have said already. I can remember sitting in the office with a gentleman from Reuters out in Zurich a couple of years ago. And he said, I'm getting phone calls every day from 30 or 40 people who want to use blockchain in their business. He said, of all those 30 or 40 people, one or two, I say, this is a great idea. The rest, I say, you don't need blockchain. You just need a good database. You don't need Don't create the problem and the solution if you don't need to. So what we must do is also recognize that we mustn't just drive everything into blockchain. We also need to be a bit sensible about this. But, I'm very supportive of it. And thank you for everybody's contributions today. I think it's been a really healthy and useful discussion. And thank you, Sharif, as always. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Yes, Mr. Ramlan.
Sharif and all the guys this evening. Since I started this business in Vietnam 2.5 years ago, my take is the potential of food supplies and food security in Vietnam is huge, but what is lacking is a blockchain. Or what they need to do, also in the region, the ASEAN region, the potential of exporting ingredients, food, services in halal is tremendous. But what we're looking is some people can trust. Right now, if I speak to someone, say, we've got this halal food from Vietnam, they look at me for a couple of minutes. Halal food from Vietnam. So that sort of, look, I would love to change it. I know I've got a huge responsibility. I've been here 2.5 years, but I hope, more Vietnamese companies can adopt into this blockchain and also have got the trust issues probably minimized. And I don't know, ask me 2 years from now, because my plan is until a 5 years plan, and hopefully we can help and seamlessly put Vietnam as one of the halal hubs in the region, if not in the world. Sharif, thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. World Talent Economy Forum has same objective. We want we are actually advocate for modern science, engineering, and technology. Definitely, we were working for developing nations with the help of developed nations. So this is the way we can minimize the gap in between developing nations and developed nations. Thank you everyone for joining today's session, and I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government, with your policymakers, with your think tank, and with your academia as well as corporations. And we are definitely want to develop a collaboration in between government, corporations, and academy, and this way we can solve many problems. Thank you, Dr. William, Professor Rob, Professor Donald, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Ramlan, and Professor David Smith for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Bye bye and take care.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you, Sharif, as always.